everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today on this last day of 2022 to film a review for the last book that we read for the Book Naturalist Book Club this year. And that book is The Hour of Land by Terry Tempest Williams. This is a book that I read for the first time a couple of years ago, and so this was a reread for me, and I loved it just as much the second time as I did the first time that I read it. It's a very beautifully written book. So, just to point out that this hardcover copy that I have has this little wrap that goes around the book and tells about it, but I think the naked hardcover is absolutely gorgeous. It has black and white photography on both sides. The spine is beautiful as well. It's just a lovely object. So Terry Tempest Williams is a very famous writer, American writer and conservationist. She has written, I think, like 15 books, and she has had pieces in multiple other anthologies. She writes primarily about the American West, particularly Utah, which is her home state. And she writes very beautifully about those Western landscapes. She also writes about feminist issues. She writes about issues of environmental justice. And this particular book, The Hour of Land, is a exploration. What's the tagline here? The subtitle is A Personal Topography of America's National Parks. And it is an exploration of several national parks here in America. And the writing is really interesting because she combines both nature writing with issues of environmental justice, with the history of the individual parks, with the political issues surrounding those parks today, with political issues surrounding resource extraction, which is a very much a issue of tension, in particular in national parks, because national lands, national forests, national parks, national monuments have often been exploited for their natural resources and for natural resource extraction. So, and I did also want to point out that Terry Tempest Williams is currently the writer in resident at the Harvard Divinity School. So she has been writing for a long time, and she is very highly regarded. She's won very many awards. And this particular book, I really enjoy a nature writing book that combines a lot of different issues. So I really like the way that she weaves in history, she weaves in social justice issues. She talks about the conflict and the again, tensions between lands that the United States has designated as national parks and those lands that originally were held by different indigenous tribes. Those tensions have not gone away entirely. And how can we honor the homelands of those indigenous tribes while also honoring the natural beauty and the wonder that is the national parks? I think those issues are really central to national parks in the United States. So I really appreciated that she tackles those issues. I don't know how many off the top of my head here. There's probably 12 different parks that she talks about in this book, one of which is the national park that exists in my home state of Maine, Acadia National Park. And so I really particularly loved that section that talked about the natural landscape in Acadia, but also talked about the history of how that park was first, brought into being, the fact that it was the Rockefeller family who was very instrumental in creating Acadia National Park, and also many of the national parks in the western part of the country. Like, that family was very instrumental in making sure that we can still honor and appreciate those beautiful places today in the United States. So I've marked a couple of places here to read to you because, I always like to share some of the writing in our Book Naturalist Book Club picks. So let me put on my reading glasses here so that I can actually see what I'm trying to read to you. So just in general, when she's talking about these issues that are confronting our national parks, I really appreciated this excerpt from page 59. Most of the issues confronting our national parks today are political. Should Devil's Tower National Monument be respected as a sacred site to the Kiowa people or managed as a recreational site for climbers? Compromises are made and so are mistakes. The Everglades are overrun with pythons. Some want them killed to restore an ecological balance. Others see the killing as cruelty. One year, a particular park is trying to control an exotic species. The next year, they stop the program because their funding has been cut by Congress. Our national park management plans tend to blow with the political winds from one administration to the other. And as a person who's involved in natural resource management myself as a career, I can certainly understand what she's talking about there. Very often, programs come into being and go out of favor as administrations change, as priorities change, as political priorities change, and it's really frustrating if you're a person who's advocating for these management techniques based on the science that has to get changed because of some political issue that really you don't feel is very central to the actual biological management of a resource. And then particularly from the Acadia National Park section, that spoke very deeply to me. I love Acadia National Park. That whole landscape on Mount Desert Island in Maine is a really special one. It is really unique to the state, and it's just wonderful that it's been protected so long. I know there's a lot of tensions between protecting that environment and the number of visitors that come to visit that area, and then the tensions that arise between the visitors and the people who live on Mount Desert Island. There's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of overcrowding, there's a lot of infrastructure issues that come into play because of the number of visitors, and the number of visitors has increased tremendously since the COVID pandemic. So I know that the other national parks are also experiencing these increases in visitors, and that conflict that creates between the visitors and the people that live around the national parks. That's a real issue that we need to talk about and we need to try to deal with as a society. But another section that I wanted to share with you from the Acadia section, I love walking up Cadillac Mountain at dawn to see the sunrise, the first glint of light that appears in the United States from equinox to equinox. I love seeing the bodies of blue islands surface like whales at low tide and disappear at high, and the lobster buoys sprinkled over the waters like confetti. I love walking the rocky coast and finding brittle stars with outstretched legs crawling on wet, slippery rocks. I love how the sea anemones open and close like flowers with the inrushing tides. I love retreating from the edge of the water into the damp woods, soft with moss and fresh with fur. In the midst of birches and maples, lichen-drenched boulders and dappled light become the stage set for Noah Theater. Yeah, that really is evocative of the landscape in Acadia and of the landscape on the coast of Maine. She has a way with words. She paints a picture in your mind of the landscapes that she's observing, and particularly when she talks about the western part of the U.S., which I have not had the pleasure to visit yet, and it's on my bucket list to do so. But those landscapes, which just simply I have no experience with, it's wonderful to have them described to you by a person who truly loves those places and that environment. So yeah, I highly recommend Terry Tempest Williams. I've also read other pieces of hers, essays that she's written that have been collected in different anthologies. I think she's a tremendous writer. She's really focusing our attention on issues that are of concern to everyone. This idea of what's the best way to protect these places, and is it does that protection then take away from another group of people who have other connections to that landscape, and how do you balance the needs of the people who want to experience the wilderness, quote unquote the wilderness, with the people who are trying to make a living, with the people who need to use those landscapes for spiritual reasons, such as the indigenous tribes. There's a lot to think about here, and she really does a nice job of laying out the issues and talking about them in a way that really makes you care about them. So I think that this is a wonderful book, gives you a little bit of an introduction to the national parks, but also gives you an introduction into the issues, the serious issues that confront us today when talking about how do we manage these spaces for everyone, and not just for the elite, not just for certain groups of people, but for all groups of people, so that everybody feels included and everybody feels welcome. I think she really touches on those issues in a way that makes a lot of sense, and in a very important way that everybody should be made aware of. So yeah, highly recommend this one. Another wonderful pick from the Book Naturalist Book Club. So in January, we will be reading A Year in the Maine Woods by Bernd Heinrich. And I've never read any Bernd Heinrich, and he's a pretty famous mid-20th century nature writer. So I'm excited to finally dip into his work. And also, you know, I love a book about anything to do with the outdoors in Maine. So looking forward to that. And I also wanted to correct a mistake I made in the list of books that we're going to be reading in 2023. I failed to mention a book that is on the list, and that is for the month of June. We will be doing an author spotlight on Jamaica Kincaid, but we will also be reading Bitch on the Female of the Species by Lucy Cooke. June is Pride Month, and this book deals with questions of gender. And I am very excited to read this book, and actually it's going to be difficult to put it off until June, but I just want to make sure that everybody knows that this is the second pick for June, along with an author spotlight on Jamaica Kincaid for the month of June. So sorry about that mistake that I made in the original announcement video for the books that we're going to be reading in the year 2023. So that is my review of In the Hour of Land. I hope that you will join us in the month of January to read A Year in the Maine Woods. And I hope that you all are enjoying the end of 2022. Hope you start off the new year with great books to read, and I will talk to you later.